Good morning. Welcome to our hybrid service of being here together and online at the same time. I am Nancy Nelson, and I am part of the worship committee, and we have been responsible for summer services at the UUCP this year. We are excited to have a chance to create these hybrid services for people, and it's still a work in progress. So if there are things you notice, please do let me know. Things that you appreciate or things that we might improve. We are happy to report that masks are not required, but they are certainly encouraged if they help you be safe or feel more comfortable, because the Whitman County is now in the green zone for COVID rates. If you would like to know more about our COVID policies for the UUCP, you can see our church website. If you are a newcomer at the UUCP or would like to know more about us, you are invited to join Reverend Elizabeth Stevens for a New to UU workshop and light lunch on Sunday, August 28th, 2 weeks from today. There will be time to get acquainted and ask questions as you are introduced to Unitarian Universalism, including a little history and understanding of our shared values and principles. If you'd like to come, call Summer in our church office or talk to Elizabeth Berlinger. She is here, she's at the back. I can also help you reach these people. We preface our service by acknowledging the land on which our homes and our church were built was not uninhabited when European settlers arrived here with their ideas of conquest and ownership. For those of us who live in Moscow and Pullman or other nearby communities, we live on the ancestral homelands of the Nimipu, called Nez Perce by the French-speaking traders, the Palouse, the Shishun, called Coeur d'Alene. If you are joining us from another place, I encourage you to discover who inhabited or moved through the place where you now live in the times before colonization and genocide. We pause and remember that we live on ground that is sacred, ground that was stolen, ground that cries out for justice and for responsible stewardship. May our remembering help us find the courage to do our part to restore wholeness to the earth and all her peoples. We also pause for just a moment to light a candle and pray for peace. I didn't arrange for a volunteer to light a candle. Is there anybody who would like to play with fire? Thank you. Thank you, Ginger. We hold in our hearts all those who are currently threatened by greed and imperialism, from the people in Ukraine to those in Somalia. And we recommit ourselves to nurturing peace, peace in the world and peace within. Now, let's say our words of welcome together. Welcome to you, old friends and new, young and old. You are an essential part of our celebration today. Whether it is your first or your 1000th Sunday in our midst, we are stronger because you are with us. We are one people of many beliefs, identities, origins, sexualities, and genders. We are all growing, all learning, all loved. Body, mind, heart, and spirit, just as you are welcome here. We'll join together in our sung, in our chalice lighting, followed by the sung affirmation. In the light of truth and the warmth of love, we gather to seek and seek to share. And I should have added, I hope people at home have a candle so they can make sure they have a chalice lit with them as well. Let's sing together. Stand in body and spirit. Let You may be seated. Today is the last day in our summer series. It's been quite the set of services. Today we are exploring the new century after having looked at the post-war years, the 60s, the 70s, all the way through the decades we're now at now, plus the last 2 decades. So much has happened in these last 20 years, so very much. These decades began with the creation of Wikipedia on January 15th, 2001. And I would like to just put in a plug for Wikipedia. I think it's a place where truth struggles to keep itself together. Please do consider supporting it. Later that year, 2001, George Bush was elected president, and Liz Cheney's father was vice president. These are the years that included the war on terror following the 9/11 2001 attacks, the devastation of Hurricane Katrina in 2005, followed by a growing climate awareness with Al Gore's film, An Inconvenient Truth, 2006. An economic recession was building even as Barack Obama was elected president in 2009. Obama's presidency was followed by the Trump presidency. Before we go to our speakers today, I want to share part of a poem by Richard Blanco, reminding us of the great personal cost of these decades. This is from his poem, What I Know of Country, published in 2019. I stayed, you stayed, we stayed for our boys and girls returning as heroes, some without legs or arms, for our Challenger and towers fainting from the sky, for the terrified lives of the Big Easy, stranded like flightless birds on roofs, for the sea that drowned our north. But we swept each grain of sand back to shore, for the candles we lit for our 20 children of Sandy Hook, feeling what we always felt, to know a country takes all we know of love. Some days are better than others, but never easy. To keep our promise every morning of every year, of every century, and wake up stumble downstairs with all our raging hope, sit down at the kitchen table again, still blurry-eyed, still tired, and say, listen, we need to talk. How have the years 2000 to 2020 shaped people? How does being part of a UU community help us live in years of change? We have 3 recorded interviews with people who grew up in the church during these decades. Following that, we'll have a conversation that Ginger will lead us into, of people here, and I'm hoping people at home as well, about how things have gone for you. We were curious to know how the times we live in and the church family that surrounded us have impacted people. I'm repeating myself, aren't I? Our 3 recorded speakers are young women who grew up in the UUCP, going to RE, at least some of the time. RE is religious education. Playing in the snow on the annual church snow retreats, and on the water on the UUCP rafting trips. They graduated from the UU class on sexuality and our bodies called Our Whole Lives, better known as OWL. Perhaps not coincidentally, all 3 of them have worked at some time in the out of doors. The first speaker is Molly Jennings. Her parents are Michael and Karen Jennings.
My name is Molly Jennings. Grew up in Moscow, Idaho, attending the UUCP church, and graduated from Moscow High School, and went to school in Tacoma, Washington at University of Puget Sound. I am currently in Ellensburg, Washington, and I am moving within the month up to Wenatchee to start a new job with Chelan Douglas Land Trust. Of course, my parents have had probably the largest impact on where I am today, and how things ended up being supportive in every shape and form of what I think I want to do. I've really found relationships in spaces that kind of exist in the outdoors to be some of the deepest and most meaningful for me. When I was in college, there was a whitewater kayaking club, and there's 2 alumni who ran it, who became mentors to me. The church was a place of community for me, and a place where I found a lot of kind of sanctuary. And I guess that was kind of the most formative part of church for me, was just the people and the relationship. 4th of July rafting trips that we'd go on were just those are vivid for me and really important. I just have really fond memories of just kind of being free range, swimming and running around and being in different rafts, and being with other kids and being around other families, and everybody just kind of, working together towards a common goal. I hope that through COVID, we've all re-examined our social contract and the need to take care of each other and how our actions impact others. Through some of our conversations around racial justice that were largely sparked by George Floyd's murder, I hope that we move from conversation to action and ways to support people that have been impacted by police violence and systemic injustices. I hope that we, through the natural disasters we're experiencing, that there's more and more willingness to address climate change. I'm hopeful, but I'm also kind of cautious. I don't expect, I guess I've learned to kind of relinquish some of my expectations about the future over the last few years. My name is Molly.
My background is in whitewater and fly fish guiding in Idaho predominantly. So running multi-day, like 6-day, usually 6 to 14, depending on the river section, day trips through the wilderness in Idaho, as well as doing then subsequently guide mental and physical health support and working in the nonprofit sector in conservation. And I now am working for a lawyer who supports outfitter and guide companies and is their legal representation. So when you think about Idaho as a space, something like guiding can be far more progressive in that when you build a crew of people together that have to rely on each other for 6+ days in the wilderness, you're building these relationships and getting to know folks in a way that's pretty thorough and requires seeing through everyone's differences and seeing folks at their best and at their worst. So in some ways, there's some really cool pockets of the Idaho guiding community where some really important and beautiful communities are being built. I think there's also a lot of like defensiveness and sort of that I'm not a bad person. I'm not a misogynist. I'm not a racist. I'm not, how dare you even talk about it? It makes me uncomfortable. And I think the reality is that we have to have those uncomfortable conversations in order to continue on that journey towards being a more inclusive state. And the outdoors are just a microcosm of what you see in any broader community. It had, sort of uncountable impact. It's hard. It was such a big part of so much of my childhood and teenage years. I think a big one is that I've never felt like when I came out as part of the LGBTQ community in my mid-20s, other changes and choices I've made, I've never felt like that would erase my community. It was growing up in the UUCP church there was so much emphasis on your search for truth and meaning and every human being full of worth and dignity. And so it struggled to understand myself in those ways for a multitude of other reasons, but I've watched friends and other loved ones really struggle with how to align who they now are with the places they come from. And because the place I came from, I felt was pretty open to whatever I became, I think I feel less of that tension of community, growing up identity, and the person I am now.
Things have been changing so much over the last since then. Like in 2008, that was when my senior year in high school was the year Obama was elected, and that was first year I voted. And then, then you end that decade and Trump's in office. Wouldn't have saw that coming at all from high school. There was so much hope at that year and that at that time, and so there's been a lot of divide that I wouldn't have expected to see. But I think that we're going to have to, I imagine that you found this talking to decades of people, that this happens. Things come, they go, they change. People get really far apart and they realize they need to work together. So then they start to find ways back to the middle, which I think are really important things. I'm currently the Associate Athletics Director at Humboldt State, or Cal Poly Humboldt, now Cal Poly Humboldt, in Northern California, and I'm the Senior Women Administrator. So I'm the second in charge of our athletics department here. It's a big job and a lot of learning to do. But I really love it. Get to work with student athletes a lot. This is a small school. I think we have about 6,500 students right now. ag focused, very hands-on learning for the students, which is why I came here, which is something I really love. And so it's something that I get to be a part of. And through athletics, you get to be a part of some pretty cool student athletes who then go off and do really cool things. So in addition to the athletics part, which if you asked 2008 Amanda, no, I wouldn't have done college athletics, but I did. Went and rowed in college. So that kind of got me here. And it's changed my path. In college, I studied oceanography. I got my bachelor's of science in geological oceanography, and I use those Excel skills every single day. And now I'm on a path to try to become an athletics director someday. So that's a pretty big change, but I love it. Big community. I think that's really important. I think being put in part of a group of people who are as diverse as you get in Moscow in some ways. There's still not a ton of diversity, but at least ideologically somewhat diverse, or interesting and different from our family. And they also values diversity, which is another thing entirely. You get to be around a lot of different things, and you learn to care about a lot of different things. You learn to be curious about a lot of different things. So, even like the year we spent learning about other religions and like going to other churches and stuff, that was, I think that's something that I take with me a lot of places where we went out, like that's something you can do. You can go be a part of someone. You can go learn about some people care about learning about, when you want to learn about them, they care about that a lot. So I think that's important. And there's a lot of compassion, I think, in the UU Church. So that's something that is a good thing to practice, and something that I try to practice every day. I don't know. People care a lot. I think that's something that people care a lot, and believing that people care a lot is something that I try to bring everywhere. And I think the church is probably part of that.
Make sure that happens.
So I'm Ginger Yoder, your Director of Family Ministries. And yes, this was supposed to be a conversation between Theo and I. We had picked out some questions, and it was, I am the oldest millennial, and Theo, they are the youngest millennial. So we were hoping to get that perspective. But instead, maybe this is an invitation to invite our audience to be a part of the conversation. And so we have 3 or 4 short questions, and I'm going to give my response, and then the questions will be on the screen. And I hope that anyone else who has a response might be able to come up and give their thoughts and opinions about these questions as well. So as I said, I was born in 1982, so I'm the oldest millennial. By some accounts, it's 80 or 82, so I'm like within a month. I was born in the first part of 82, so like a month millennial. And that means that I have a little bit of a different perspective, because I remember not having computers. I remember not having the internet. I remember there were no cell phones around until I was an adult. And so that puts us in a little bit, this older millennial group, in this little different place than the rest of millennials. Even my brother, born 4 years later, is in a much different place. But I think it's an interesting perspective, as I had graduated high school the year 2000. So this is really the 2000 to 2020 to now is really my growing up, emerging adult years. And so the first question that we wanted to discuss really was, we think we have to start with 9/11. I mean, such a change, a moment in our history, in our American history, in the world history. So I was 19 that day, and being a broke young college student in 2000, I didn't have a TV or a phone or any other really communication device, which now seems crazy. And so I didn't know it had happened until I was going to class. And the University of Idaho held classes that day. There were no We were one of the only universities in the nation that held class. And yet I really appreciated that because I had a place to go and something to do and a community that grounded me in being able to comprehend the enormity of what had happened, which was still emerging. The moment of 9/11 that hit me the hardest was I was babysitting for a family in town who had a 5-year-old. And that Saturday, I was there in the morning and the paper had come and I didn't grab it. And it had been our kind of thing as she was learning to read that we would look at the paper and read the headlines together. And I didn't even think to grab it. And she grabbed the paper and opened it. And the first words I ever heard her read aloud was about the terror attacks. And I didn't know I'd get emotional. It changed me because it was the moment I realized that as an adult in this world, I had a responsibility to what we were bringing our young people into, and that I could not change the world. I could not make this better. I could not change this. And yeah, I could help create safe, loving spaces for our children to process the world and our response to the world. And now when I see my goals with our religious education program, I can see that thread through the whole thing, that the world is scary and big and hard things happen, and yet we can provide spaces for all of us, but especially our children and families, to navigate the world with love and trust, and with and so that they can learn to gain the skills where they can also then give that. Each of those speakers were children in the RE program, both that I babysat for and that I had in RE, and yet they're also millennials, so I'm like blown away by how amazing they are. So 9/11 really impacted me through even what I do today, the goals I have for how I live my life. The next question we had was, what other politic or maybe just event or social change affected you the most? And for me, coming especially into the 2010s, identity has taken a forefront, that the idea of who we are as people is so expansive. I mean, when I was growing up, there really wasn't a non-gender or gender fluid idea. This was, you were a boy or a girl, and that's what it was. And moving into this idea that not only that, but my expression of who I am, the clothes I wear, the you know, all of these things are more expansive and diverse than we could have ever imagined. That each of us as individuals don't fit, as I said, into these boxes, that we can move out into the world, and that can change with each day as we learn more and more about ourselves. And that has been so liberating and so amazing, and also hard, that we have to challenge ourselves each and every day. And that's where I'm really grateful for this community, the UUCP, because this community is engaged in this work as well. And so I can come here, and I know there are people who are also on this journey and in this work, and we can share ideas and have respect for each other, and that this church takes its first principle to heart, the dignity and worth of every person. And we live that, or try to live that every day, and we're all imperfect, and yet we can all come back together every time and rededicate ourselves to that principle and that way of living in the world. And I'm excited to see, I mean, if this has changed in the last 10 or 12 years, where are we going to be in the next 10 or 12 years? What parts of ourselves will we be able to express that we weren't able to ever express before, or didn't even know that might be a part of our human experience? So I'm really excited for the future, and I know this community will be there along that journey for all the people who need it. And the last question we have, what in the 2000s brought you joy? Because we wanted to end on a high note. And then of course my answer ended up being joyful and hard. The thing I thought about the most is I'm just like such a social, outgoing person, that social media has been an intense part of my life since it came out. I mean, I remember like so excited about MySpace and my like 8 songs I got to choose that represented me that day. And like Tom was my friend. I mean, I was just like, I loved it. And so then of course Facebook came, and I was like one of the first people on Facebook. My brother, who's huge into tech, told me, he's like, have you heard of Facebook? You have to get on. Never heard of it. And then now, of course, I don't do a lot of Twitter, but all of this, and then TikTok, now I'm like obsessed with. And so, and of course it brings it, we know that it doesn't bring a true sense of connection that happens between people, but it allows me to connect with people from all over the world and all of my friends and keep track of where they are. And I feel like I have a piece of their lives, and I find that joyful. And then I have to be careful that I come back here to these spaces where I actually get true connection, because I know we need both, because it is kind of an addictive double-edged sword. And for those of you who might not know TikTok, yeah, I thought there's no way I could be on TikTok. That's for like young people. And in fact, I failed at doing Snapchat. I could never quite figure that one out. But what I love about TikTok, I was just going to say this, is I get to see so many people's stories, that people get to put up a piece of themselves, and it's short, but I get to get a glimpse into their lives. And I have learned so much about what I was saying before, the diversity of how people experience the world and themselves, that I've been finding that just immensely fulfilling lately. And then I appreciate this loving, holding community of long-term relationships of people that I can actually see and touch and feel, because I think that's really important. So those are my answers. And we have the slide with the questions. And so if anyone else would like to come up and answer. Yeah. Okay. Oh, and that's true. Maybe, can we see the chat when people write in the chat, Alex? The question we're holding is, how can we make sure we hear and see people at home? I would at least like people to write in the chat what their answers are to these questions, because I know other people on Zoom can see that. And then perhaps as other people are answering live here, I will figure out a way to make that happen. And if you could introduce yourself. Are we standing correctly?
All right. So, yeah, I just felt compelled to come up here because, first of all, we met Ginger in 2005 when we moved here, and Ginger was a huge part of why we even joined the church. So that's pretty cool. And then Ginger, about a year after we were here, so I'm answering question number 3. Yeah. And my name is Tom Salisbury. I don't know if I even said that. But anyway, so Ginger said, hey, you have to lead the youth group. And I think that was in 2006. And our children at the time were very little. So we said, yeah, we'll do that. So we had Emerald and Molly. So it's so cool to see them now as adults, taking leadership roles, doing really wonderful things. And to talk about community, and that's for sure what has brought us a lot of joy. And to see the millennial group taking on that leadership role is just wonderful. So kudos, parents.
I'm Alan Rasmussen. There's expenditures to Hanford, Nick Dyer. In the 2000s, it brought me joy was a personal experience that didn't come from that era. I'm a real reader of books, and I have never even opened Gone with the Wind. I actually had to see the full movie from beginning to end. About 2 years ago, at the time the pandemic started, I picked it up, and I found this fabulously written book, among other people's many. I've never read, you know, 100 other novels, and this is as good as any of them, at least to me.
Hi, I'm Jordan Kirkpatrick. So I was going to answer question 1 about reflections on 9/11. So I'm a 93 baby, so I was about 8 when it happened, and that probably sculpted my entire world experience. It was the first big world event that I remember happening, and I'm a research scientist, and we had a bunch of lab techs in that are 18, 19, we were talking about it, and we're like, you know, this is our big defining moment of the world, and they're like, oh, that's neighborhood for us. And it was really interesting thinking of how much violence we've all seen and being so young. And for them, school shootings was the big, scary, you know, so much more at home. Or for me and my classmates, it was such a bigger, broader, big bad guy.
Thank you.
I also wanted to offer my reflection on how 9/11 affected my life. I am Olive Peterson Pope, and I was born in 1984, so I was a junior in high school, and I had been in Sweden as an exchange student for about a month when it happened. And my host dad didn't speak very good English, and I didn't speak Swedish yet. And so he was telling me as he was driving me home from school about this thing that had happened and trying to explain, and I thought I must be misunderstanding what had happened. And so I saw from across the world the way the news coverage from the US and the way the news coverage from other parts of the world. And then I saw how the rest of the world moved on from this huge thing that had happened in the US. And it was almost a year later then that I came home to the US, and it was still the only thing in the news and the only thing that had happened in that year for everyone who was here. And it shaped my view of the way that we view the rest of the world, and also how the rest of the world views us as a country, and how different those perspectives are, and how different people's perception of what major world events are. And it opened me to being much more aware of other people's experiences of the world.
I also wanted to do a 9/11, I guess. So in July 2001, I had just moved from Brooklyn, New York to Portland, Oregon to start law school. So unlike Ginger, wherever she went, my school also had classes that day, and I didn't go. I was just so overwhelmed because I was, you go to the World Trade Center for random reasons when you live in New York. So I used to go to the Borders books because my job, I used to do trainings around town, and you can catch a bus to Newark Airport at that time. And so, anyone could have been there, really. And so I was just sort of thinking, I'm going to hear that someone I know that I spent the last 5 years with had died, right? I was just really concerned about that. So anyway, what 9/11, I guess, taught me, and ever since then, on that day, I have a big book that the New York Times put out of all the obituaries they had written, and I read until I feel like I'm done. Obituaries, just because that's the event that made me realize that, like, remembering people's lives and the people they affected was important. Like, I never understood Memorial Day until that event, because whenever terrible things happen, there are other people. There's a ripple effect, and you should remember the suffering of others, and the contribution that they made in the world.
Do we have any comments from people at home? Oh, we're not going to be able to. Okay. We have time. You're great.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Juno Peterson Pope, and I would like to offer my perspective, kind of a mixture of the three. They kind of blend together for me. I was born in December of '89, so I was in middle school when 9/11 happened. It also happened to be the year that I came out as bisexual. And I grew up in a very small town in Maine, like 8,000 people, small. My middle school and high school were 3 different towns combined, towns, not cities. And it was very confusing to be in middle school, and we had a student whose dad worked at the Pentagon, and so basically everybody got bussed home as soon as possible. And I remember getting home, actually I went to daycare still at the time, seeing everything on the news. And later on in 2008, when I graduated, I had met with a Navy recruiter and had joined the Navy. And something that really stuck with me through all of that is that during boot camp, the whole point is they kind of like break you down and then build you back up to be what they want you to be. And we were all kind of not doing what we were supposed to be doing. And so we got brought into this room where we had this big screen, and we were told to stand at attention. And then we were forced to watch footage of 9/11, and we were told, the weight of the world is about to be on your shoulders. And I remember just standing there sobbing, because who the heck does something like that, And so it kind of colored the rest of my young adulthood. I'm now in my early 30s, but something good that came out of that is that I met my first wife, Jessica, and we had our beautiful daughter, Ruby. And then a few years ago, I met my now wife, Olive, and we now have our families have kind of blended together. And so, yeah, kind of ended on a good note, even though the beginning part of the 2000s was pretty rocky. So, yeah.
I'm Sue Ingalls, and I'm too old to be a millennial, and even my daughters aren't, but they are in their early 40s. When they were children, we tried to shelter them when they were young. They went to Waldorf school, they didn't watch television. We really tried to protect them when they were young. We didn't try to do that forever, but we felt strongly that little children didn't need to be exposed to soap operas and whatever the heck is on television. So now I have grandchildren, and my older granddaughter who lives here, who's now 4.5, when she was about 3, we were taking a walk, and we were all, of course, isolating because of COVID and everything, but I assumed that she wouldn't know anything about it. And we were walking down the street, and she saw a cup, a discarded soda cup with a straw. And she said, "Grandma, do not touch that." She said, "There is this terrible disease, and it might be that the person who was drinking that has the disease, and if you touched it, you might get it too." And I was glad she had the information, but it kind of made me sad that a 3-year-old would have to defend herself against something at that point that we didn't even understand and maybe still don't.
I'll look around the room, the last view. Okay. To everybody for contributing, being a part of this community, for sharing these years with us. If you're interested, you might consider, and you've missed some of the summer services, you might consider looking online at the other decades. People have been saying how wonderful it's been to learn about each other and understand how much we share in these times. I'd like to now close with our last hymn, and it's number 170 in the Gray Hymnal. "We Are a Gentle, Angry People." Michelle Gallo accompanies it, and the words and music were written by Holly Nearing. Our service today with a slideshow of kids doing UU things in the UUCP religious education program, which we lovingly call RE. It's really clear that our church plays a role in helping people cope with these times and work to create the future that moves us toward our dreams. Please join me in the words for extinguishing our chalice. Do we have that slide or not? Okay. We extinguish this chalice that it might glow gently in our hearts. May it light our paths as we leave this place. May it guide our way until we are together again. Thank you for being here and have a wonderful week.